The frustrations of the residents of Huruma there as, the rescue operations were going on. That is a clip from Friday night. And indeed, the whole country worried about the state of construction in the country and what next? What happens now? Like we're talking about some of those cases in court. Let's now talk a bit about the legal side. What sort of redress do those who've been affected by these incidents have? We have Joyner Okonjo, who's a commercial lawyer. Thanks for joining us. And we now have the president of the Architectural Association of Kenya, Waweru Gatecha. Joyner, why do we not have any single person convicted in the history of this country, from an incident of a collapsed building? They're charged for manslaughter or negligence and that sort of thing. Not a single conviction.
Well, thank you, Yvonne, for having me in studio. I would have to say that a conviction comes at the end of a judicial process. As you had mentioned before, that the Nyamakima building, upon collapse, someone was charged and the matter was still in court. So then your question would be directed to the judiciary in terms of the speed with which they handle such matters.
Yeah, but does that speed, does it concern you? The Nyamakima building came down in 2006. This is now 2016,
Absolutely.
10 years later, and that's a case that's still pending in court. There were also 3 other officials from City Hall who were charged with negligence. Are you frustrated by this? If so, what are commercial lawyers saying about this or doing about it?
Absolutely. It's a cause for concern because the speed with which justice is dispensed is also a determinant as to whether justice was actually achieved. And in such cases, you would also notice that it's not an isolated issue, it's not an isolated case. All cases take a certain amount of time. There's issues of backlog, there's issues of judicial officers being overwhelmed by work. So these are some of the issues that the judiciary has been trying to address, and I must commend the Chief Justice. He has really done a great job in trying to bring in more judicial officers and even judges and magistrates to handle such matters. So up until we get to the point where we can confidently say that a matter can take between X and Y amount of months and years, there's really nothing much we can do, because speeding up certain cases would mean you're delaying other cases, and no one has a right to more justice than the other person. You'll all have to be subject to the same court diary, you all have to be subject to the same processes and procedures. So really beyond that, it's only up to the judicial officers charged with the responsibility of trying those persons to either speed up the determinations or we just have to wait.
All right. What sort of legal redress do these individuals have? I'm sure you've heard this narrative now, that why would they even stay in buildings like that anyway? That's another whole conversation about the economic situation.
Yes.
But the fact that you're living in a building like that doesn't have approval, we're almost starting to make it seem like we're blaming the victim and that it is supposed to be the tenants to do the due diligence. How am I going to even start to find out that this has a certificate of occupation and, did they use registered officials? What sort of redress do tenants have, do victims have from an incident such as this one?
Well, in my opinion, I would say blaming the victims is absolutely out of the question. Because as you rightly said, if I was to go rent a house from someone called Mogaka, I have no way of determining whether Mogaka actually got a certification from the Architectural Association, from the Engineers Board, from the approvals from the Nairobi City County. All I do is get a lease, sign it, check the house, bulbs are working, everything is fine, and I move in.
You're talking of a lease, Joyner.
Absolutely.
Most people don't even use a lease. Let's be honest.
For the majority that do not even have leases, they come into a house just by looking at it and they think it's fine and they move in. So then that means when something wrong happens, when there's a damage, when there's a wrong, someone has to take responsibility. In law, there's a concept called tort. Whenever there is a wrong, there must be a remedy. So we all cannot absolve ourselves and say, it was not up to me, I shift the blame to the engineer says I shift it to the architect takes it back to Nairobi City Council. We cannot, it has to stop somewhere. And the person who's going to determine who gets the blame is the court. Because we cannot sit in judgment just by looking at the building and determine and say, it must have been the mixing of the cement or the reinforcement.
So the victims do have...
Absolutely. They should sue jointly and severally with the Nairobi City County being at the forefront of it, the engineer in charge of the project, the architect, the I understand the National Construction Authority does not have a mandate because it came into being after the building was put up. And from the comments I had before with your discussion with the other two, is that there was actually no engineer and there were no approvals. That in itself does not sanitize the whole process. It doesn't mean that these people do not have a redress. They still do, because it is a function of the inspectorate at the City Council to move around and to inspect and ask, hey, you're putting up a building, let me see your permit. If you don't have a permit, they should stop you immediately, forcefully. Which then brings me to another point. Even in cases where there are approvals, and you find buildings have been earmarked for demolition and, you know, such kind of redress, you find that the developers then run to us and tell us to go to court and get injunctions, which is fine. It is their right. It is within the law. However, then, the issue that should be addressed is then, should the court wait for 3 years to determine whether this building is fit for consumption while the lives of others are at risk?
Okay, all right, because some say lawyers are also part of the problem.
Well, we do all work.
The injunctions and all of this and putting that
in place.
Have a right
and
the Nairobi County government has actually said, well, that's part of the problem. We identify building X as being suspect, unfit, and, you know, contractor Y or, you know, owner Y goes and says, no, you know, let's have an injunction. So then again, you're part of the problem and the solution? So well, I understand there's a legal process.
Handle the process.
Okay, but then again,
the solution I would give.
All right.
If you run to court and stop your building from being demolished tomorrow, at least there should be a sense of urgency. Okay. Let the matter be heard, because there's 50 people in that building whose lives are at risk, while we are taking 2-3 years within which to determine whether.
And in this case, 10 years since Nyamakima, and that is still yet to be resolved.
Quite sad.
So even if they have, you know, their day in court, they need to be prepared for a long day in court.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. A sad picture, but at least that, you know, they have legal redress of sorts. Waweru, let's bring you in on this one. You know, registered officials, and we've been talking about this with your colleagues who were here earlier, the registered colleagues, we like to say and put it. But, you know, to what extent is the association concerned with the fact that there's a lot of quacks out there? I know you're concerned with those who are in the profession. But does it worry you that there's a lot of people out there claiming to be architects, doing the work of architects, and are not really architects?
Thank you, Yvonne. Of course it does worry us. It worries us as professionals. It worries us as registered persons. It worries us as citizens, as inhabitants of Nairobi. Let me put it this way. I think it should worry everybody. I think it should worry well beyond architects and engineers and lawyers and the media. It should worry everybody. I think what we require right now is to achieve a state of urgency, a state of panic, understand that things are dire. If you've been to Huruma, if you've walked around Pipeline, Embakasi, and many other areas of Nairobi, you will understand that there is a crisis in this country that requires urgent measures beyond normal systems, okay? What is happening out there is extraordinary, if I can use that word. It requires extraordinary measures.
What are those extraordinary measures?
For example, the building that came down in Huruma, no architect was involved, no engineer was involved, no approvals. It's built on riparian land, okay? It's built in record time, it's come down. There's many other buildings of that type in Huruma today. I walked around there Monday afternoon, okay? Where is a sense of urgency? If we're going to talk about saving the lives of Kenyans, we must evict, we must issue eviction notices. This person must be removed on their own will, and if they're not going to move out, then they must be forcefully evicted. I am not a lawyer, and I may not be able to address the legal aspects of that. But if this building is clearly marked as dangerous, it's beyond rehabilitation, it is going to collapse imminently, okay? We're still in the rainy season. I think, you know, we're talking too much and doing too little. There are buildings that are leaning towers in Huruma today. There are buildings in Embakasi Pipeline. We need a sense of crisis, a sense of urgency. Call it executive order, call it whatever it is. I think we're having too many conversations in boardrooms, and we're not doing enough on the ground.
All right, and we're having too many conversations perhaps on television as well. So tell me, you say everybody should be concerned.
Absolutely.
The Architectural Association is concerned.
Absolutely.
What role do you think your association can play in this sense of urgency, in this sense of taking extraordinary measures to try and right this wrong?
Okay, I'll tell you, as it stands right now, and in this particular crisis related to the Huruma collapse, we are working in a multi-agency team, okay, pulled together by the State Department of Public Works. The Principal Secretary there, Professor Maringa, has pulled together Architectural Association, National Construction Authority, National Building Inspectorate, the Institute of Quantity Surveyors of Kenya, the Board of Registration of Architects and Quantity Surveyors. We've all sat, we've all looked at this problem together, we all went to the site together. We are working together towards understanding the 50, the 70, the 100 most dangerous buildings, ensuring that eviction notices have been issued and that people are evicted. Now, it's not just a question of eviction. Of course, you must provide solution to where do they go. I think if we experience that sense of urgency, it's not going to be a crisis to where people should go. It's not difficult to put up temporary accommodation to house people in schools. What I think is completely unacceptable is that people should continue living in those buildings, condemned as beyond rehabilitation, as is the building right next to the one that collapsed. Where is that sense of urgency? We feel it, we have been to the ground, we have written our reports, we are speaking, we are speaking, we are speaking.
Yeah.
There's too little action as far as I'm concerned.
All right, I'd like to talk about a bigger problem here. Could it be, you know, I mean, we have a housing deficit in this country.
Absolutely.
And people need to live. People, in fact, have a right, it's one of, you know, the defined human rights, to access to decent housing. So when we start to say, okay, fine, you know, we can evict them, let's talk about that bigger problem and how we solve it. Of this deficit of housing in the country, what would the solutions be from the architecture's point of view in terms of solving this issue? Because truth be told, they're living there because they really have no other choice.
Okay, thank you. Good question. The housing deficit is there, has been there, and perhaps will continue to be there. It is not going to be solved by building dangerous, uninhabitable buildings on riparian land.
Fair enough.
On the edge of a river.
Right.
Okay? That's dangerous. That's not going to solve the housing crisis. Housing is defined to a standard.
Yeah.
Okay? We must provide housing for the people who cannot supply their own housing. Okay? As far as I'm concerned, what we need is state-provided serviced land, okay, at a minimum. Okay? You may go into the state should provide housing as well. At a minimum, state-provided serviced land, okay? Because then thereafter the market has a chance of providing housing at the affordable level that perhaps will suit that level of income. If we don't do that, if we don't service land, if we don't provide service land in adequate quantities, what you end up with is slums. Slums, informal settlements, essentially are places, dwellings without services.
Right.
Infrastructure services. No roads, no water, no safety, no lighting. Exactly what you see out there.
Yeah.
Uninhabitable.
Okay, and that would be something that we probably need to start solving, you know, right away. He talked about evictions for those, and in fact, when the president toured the site, you know, he ordered those people to evacuate the buildings. Where do they go to? And when you start to tell people, we're evicting you, is the state, you know, mandated to say, we're moving you here? Because you know what they did? They moved them to the local primary school. Schools have opened, you know, this week. Is the state, you know, supposed to provide alternative housing? So when you tell me to move out of this building because it is not fit for human habitation, you know, who then? Do you just tell me, okay, go, leave, we're evicting you, then what? Who then takes responsibility? Or is that my problem as a tenant?
Well, if I can comment on the issue of the state providing adequate housing, we must appreciate that inadequate housing has been a problem that's been there for a very long time. And much as each and every person is entitled to decent housing in the Constitution, some of these rights are progressive rights. It will not happen overnight. We cannot fault the government completely for there being lack of enough
But surely, we've been independent 50 years.
50 years,
This
correct.
is the fourth administration we have in this country.
And the Constitution
It is
came into
progressive.
being in 2010.
Nonetheless, the government still had,
Absolutely.
you know,
they have the duty to show what they're doing and working towards to achieve that right.
Yeah.
Yes. So what I'm saying is it's not a magic pill. It's not something that will happen overnight. If there is a crisis today and people have to be evicted, it doesn't mean that overnight there'll be 60-story buildings ready for occupation for the victims to get in. But then it's a wake-up call to the state as well to prepare itself. There was a report that there's thousands of houses that have been condemned. In the unlikely event, and God forbid that all these buildings happen to be unoccupied overnight by some reason, disaster, an act of God, where do all these people go to?
Yeah.
You can't just tell them to go rent houses elsewhere. Perhaps they do not have options within their economic stretch or you know, stronghold.
Yeah.
Therefore, the state should come in the sense to evict these people forcefully because they're protecting your life.
Okay.
So for you
is that legal, that forceful eviction?
Absolutely. It's your life on the line, so they should protect you from it.
And then
Yvonne,
eviction,
do you know,
what happens after eviction?
After eviction, then, you should find alternatives. The state is only supposed to give you temporary accommodation. I cannot say, because I was evicted from my house in Mathare today, that then the state will house me for the next 20 years. I mean, really. For the short period, for the emergency period, fine. They should find alternative accommodation for them while they try to get everything in order. And while we are finding out whether these buildings are actually inhabitable and who's to blame for the inhabitability of the building in the first place.
All right.
Yes.
When you take a look at this situation, who's to blame?
This is a matter that's going to go to court. I would, in my professional opinion as a lawyer, I would advise the victims to sue jointly and severally. As to what percentage of that blame, of course the Nairobi City Council comes in. The NCA was not involved at the time. We have the developer, the owner of the building. They should all come to court and say, I should not be held accountable because I did ABCD. I should not be held accountable because I did ABCD. And even if there were approvals from the Nairobi City Council, it still does not sanitize the fact that the building was inhabitable and that there was negligence in the process.
Okay. When we talk about justice, then there's also, you know, reparations.
Yes.
Do we have that in Kenyan law, you know, that says, okay, it's fine, we will charge person XYZ with negligence, manslaughter, and let's say we're lucky enough to have convictions in this country for once on this or any other incident, then can we start to seek damages, reparation, and from whom? And excluding all of these things, can any of these victims just go ahead and sue the government of Kenya and say, you know, this was done? And do we have to wait for a conviction for then us to start seeking damages?
For the suing the government bit, of course the Nairobi City Council is a unit of government, so by virtue of suing the city county now, they will be suing the government directly. On the issue of whether they can seek damages, absolutely.
Does it have to wait for the conviction of the individual?
No, they can have both processes run concurrently. The criminal aspect of it and the civil. You see, the criminal aspect is a bit straightforward because, you know, lives are lost. There are death certificates to prove there was a death and it occurred due to ABCD. As to whether you are liable for that death is now for the court to determine.
All right. Okay. And are they going to be able to afford your services?
Absolutely. As a commercial lawyer? The LSK is one of the most brilliant associations
because when you take a look at it, we have to pay the architects, we have to pay the contractors, we have to pay the NCA, now we have to pay a lawyer.
We are doing very well for ourselves. I mean, lawyers are the most affordable service providers in this country.
Oh, is that so?
So they should feel free to approach, you know, lawyers to sue on their behalf. But really, Yvonne, to be serious, it's quite saddening. We really sympathize with what has happened, and I insist the buck has to stop somewhere. We all cannot drop the ball and say, you know, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it was... Someone has to take responsibility. If I was to paint my gate at home today, or to bring down a tree just so I can put up a billboard, trust you me, the city council will be on my neck on the same day.
Right.
Why is it that a building that takes months to come up is brought up, it is occupied, and not a single person from the city council bothers to come and ask what their
knows about it?
And
which is very scary, isn't it, though? I mean, isn't it scary that there's this building that had gone up, was being occupied, and the Nairobi County government, yes, you're right, didn't know about it.
Thousands. And building happens in open space. It's not a miracle. You don't wake up one morning to 6 stories. So someone really has to take the blame. At the end of the day,
who should that be, Waweru?
Let me put it this
Where
way.
do we look?
We need a serious sense of urgency, if I say nothing else tonight, okay? But if you want a straight answer, the power over land exists, eminent domain, development control. Development control vests in the county government, okay? That's the power to determine this can happen here and this cannot happen here. They permit, they inspect, and they can enforce whatever it is that is requiring enforcement. But it's all of us. It's politics, it's society, it's corruption, okay? Somebody somewhere with money is paying off the system to ignore, okay, his dastardly acts out there.
Right.
It's societal malaise. We need a sense of urgency. Talking and negotiating and following old formula is not working for us. The crisis is real. The danger is present. The buildings out there are just not fit for human occupation, period. We need to understand that.
Okay, and I think that would be a good place to leave it. Waweru Getachew is the president of the Architectural Association of Kenya, and Joyner Okonjo, who's a commercial lawyer. The last word tonight: there's been no single conviction of anybody held responsible and found guilty and liable by the court of law in this country to date. In fact, one of those individuals, Jimmy Kihonge, who, you know, and the commercial lawyer will let me know when I'm just about to go sub judice. So, however, he was able to rebuild that building in the course of that court case from 2006 to 2016. There's a sense of urgency. Do we all feel it? Does the judiciary feel it? Do the architects feel it? Do the contractors feel it? Does the NCA feel it? Do the county governments feel it? Do you feel it? Do owners feel it? Do tenants feel it? That tonight is the last word. Thanks for joining us on the show tonight and indeed every other night. We will see you again tomorrow. I am Yvonne Okwara Matole. Good night.